This episode is brought to you by Summer School Electronics. With pedals like the Snow Day Delay, the Pep Rally Fuzz, the Trash Panda, and my personal favorite, the Science Fair, which is two classic dirt pedals in one, with a mid-boosted overdrive on one side, a black lab rat circuit on the other, and a blend knob to blend between them to find the perfect classic stacked dirt sound you're looking for, it's hard not to find something you'll love. Mark builds all of his pedals by hand in Syracuse, New York, where he also works as a full-time educator. In addition to the super fun graphics on their pedals, Mark also offers custom artwork. Want your dog's face on a pedal? He can do it. Want your face on a pedal? He can make that happen too. Go over to summerschoolelectronics.com and make sure to tell him that 40 Watt Podcast sent you. All right, y'all. It's that time again. It's Philip with 40 Watt Podcast coming back at you. Got another opportunity to speak to another friend of mine that I've gotten to watch grow and grow as not only a musician but as a songwriter and sort of get their name out there. Fellow Mississippi born and raised, although he's moved off to Georgia, and we won't hold it against him too much. I mean, he's still in the South, so we're still going to claim him as long as he'll let us. Talking about my friend Spencer Thomas. Spencer, how are you doing?
Hey, Philip. I'm doing great. Thank you.
Awesome. So for those of you that aren't aware, and that's far too many of you, we're going to work on fixing that a little bit. Spencer is a singer-songwriter, originally out of the Jackson area. He's living in Athens, Georgia now. He's got an album put out in 2019, and it is phenomenal. So I'm going to let him talk about that. Spencer, tell us about you, growing up, music, how you discovered music. How'd you get into all this?
Oh, man. Well, let's just go ahead and release the can of worms. Yeah, so when I was younger, I was overweight and under-athletic, and I played a lot of video games. And I didn't know that music was a thing that maybe I could actually do until the 6th grade. I was a tuba player, middle school, and I was doing a pretty good job, I think. And I was like, oh, you know what? I think I have a grasp around this music thing. And it wasn't until I think 8th grade I started playing the drum set over at a friend's house, and that's just when it all clicked. It was really from that point on, I was like, no more video games. It's all instruments now. So from then on, I just kind of locked myself in my room, and I didn't lock myself. I just closed the door, and and I just play guitar, or sit on the bed and play some cheap Casio keyboard that I borrowed from a friend. Played the drum set, obviously, a lot. And, I just wanted to play everything. I wanted to explore everything. I never really called myself a guitar player or a drummer or anything. I just wanted to, I wanted to understand each instrument and its place in the ensemble. I wanted to understand how all of it works. And I think, and I guess naturally, after dabbling in guitar, bass, and drums and all that, I eventually took to songwriting, and that brought me to college, where I met you, Philip Carter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the way to Delta State, and I'll mention I've had another Delta State alumnus friend of ours. I've had Jeremiah Mathus on a few episodes ago talking about his music and the Memphis music scene. And
great.
Yeah. It was a real fun talk.
The Ellie badge.
Yeah. Ellie badge. He's still doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I hadn't seen him in a while, but I love the guy. I'm so glad you talked to him.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So you came to Delta State, and this is where some people will know you, obviously, from your solo Hangin Tough album. Some people are going to know you as the drummer in Young Valley. Which before we started recording, I joked that, you know, I hear people talk about, oh, the drummer for Young Valley now has a solo album. I'm like, I knew it. He's always going to be a guitarist to me. It's because that's how I met you, playing guitar, because I met you I met you, but then I remember you in Dandy and the Lions.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the band that Zach Lovett and I started. Zach, who also was a songwriting partner of mine, he was really, I would say it was more of a mentor-teacher, a mentor-student relationship, because Zach really was the one who taught me to write songs. But it's, you know, and eventually, as I learned, it became a collaborative effort. And so that was where it started, with Dandy and the Lions. Those were the first songs that I wrote. First time I'd really been in an actual band that like wrote their own songs. And like made a record, that was a really good experience for me in college. You know, it also made me learn, like, you know, that was the first time I played in a band and went to music festivals. Like, shout out to Otherfest. You know, there was like a Bluff City or Beale Street. I can't remember, some kind of music festival that we played in Memphis, and it's like, I would see professionals,
right?
You know, and we would play a set before these professionals, and I would go, okay, there's a lot more to learn still, and so I was so grateful for that.
Yeah, I was actually preparing for our talk today. I was re-listening to a few tracks on your album. I was kind of listening back to some of that Young Valley stuff, but then also I decided to deep dive, and it turns out the Reverb Nation page for Dandy and the Lion still exists. So I was reliving some of those. Yeah, underneath,
don't tell me that.
Yeah, underneath my feet, The War, Street Choir Blues, those are still up there. It's still got some past performances listed: Old Venice Pizza Company, Zorba's, and Delta State. I think I was probably Rock the Quad, the Delta State gig that's up there.
Yeah, it absolutely was. Oh man, don't you wish that everything that you ever decided that you were done with in your brain would just erase from the internet? You know, you're like,
you're like, no, I'm
like,
past that.
That part of my life is totally over, and I don't want to remember. I mean, I do want to remember Dandy and the Lions, but I just think of myself. I don't know. I was probably wearing suspenders or something.
You know, that's a good question. The one picture that's up there is it's from Rock the Quad when we had that low stage, and it's black and white, so it's pretty hard to really see what you were wearing. So you're safe. Yeah, you're safe.
Oh man, it's funny. Why do we get embarrassed about old pictures of us?
Yeah, we shouldn't. That was us in that moment. That was who we were in that moment. I've been listening to lots of podcasts with lots of producers and songwriters and musicians, and inevitably the question comes up about past things you've done, right? And they're like, do you want to go back and change any of that? And they're like, no, because, you know, as much as that's not who I am now, that's who I was then. You know, it's like that was me in that moment, and you can't record something and think this is going to represent me for the rest of my life. Much in the way, you know, Dave Matthews Band wanted to get past that one song that's not coming to my head right now anyway, which is probably good. They'd probably appreciate that. Yeah, that one.
About ants marching?
Okay. They wanted to get past all those songs, but nobody ever let them.
Oh, man, I can't imagine being a band that has a 20 or 30-year career. You know?
Yeah, and you're known for one song?
Oh gosh, that's even worse.
That's even worse. Yeah. Like, to have a band like that long. Could you imagine, like, Spin Doctor still going on tour, having to play Two Princes and Little Miss Can't Be Wrong? You know.
Yeah. Oh man, who's the band that does Hey Jealousy?
Oh, was that? Oh, one of those, Sister Hazel? No. Oh, I can't remember. Like, I am terrible with band names and song titles. I remember grooves and songs. My wife's the one that remembers, oh, that's who sang this, and that's who sang this, and that's the name of this song. Yeah. I don't even know the names of most of the songs on my favorite album of all time. I'm like, oh, it's track 5.
Yeah. yeah. Oh, exactly. When you have the CD player, you're like, oh yeah, track 5.
Right.
Track 6 is the jam, though.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Track 3 is the moody instrumental or the that's how you remember these things. So you go through Dandy and the Lions. Then you guys get together, and I remember Zach. Zach was always sort of an anomaly to me at Delta State too. He came in as like a creative songwriting force when he got to Delta State. So like,
oh, yeah, already.
Dude, what a phenomenal songwriter he is. So you guys all team up together and form Young Valley, and y'all saw some success there.
We did. We saw a lot of movement too. We just toured, and I mean, Zach and I were continuing to like cultivate our own songwriting skills. I feel like I had a lot of personal growth as far as a songwriter in Young Valley, and I mean, and Zach continued as well, because like I always saw Zach as like this huge. There's a very scary looking spider that just walked across the rug. But Zach has always been, like to me, he was always like a monster songwriter because he already had these brilliant songs in the can when I was just first learning how to write songs. Right. And so over the course of Young Valley, I mean, he would just keep getting better and better, and by the time we were about to ready to go our separate ways, he's got some songs. He's got some songs that if Zach ever listens to this episode, I just hope that, like, for me, Zach, just make sure that they get recorded, because I mean, he is still just so incredible and just has like an attention to detail with every word, and he taught me all of the shortcuts. He was just like, keep your narrative straight. Like, make sure all of your story is lining up. Like, cut out the little these and pronouns and certain words that you just don't need. And he'd always be like, try to speak the words. And like, so much of that stuff, I still ask myself every time I write a song. That just, he has that ability.
Yeah, he just does it. It's really, and not to, because I hope to get Zach on this podcast at some point or another. I'm going to reach out to him and see what I can do. But, and definitely not, hope he doesn't hear this now, because I don't want, the ego to get too big before I get to you, Zach. But, I'm reminded of the way I remember seeing, Garth Brooks on, Austin City Limits, and he's covering, To Make You Feel My Love, which is a Bob Dylan song. And Garth talks about Bob Dylan. He's like, I was never a Bob Dylan fan. He said, but then I like heard songs, and he heard this one, and he said, Bob Dylan just has a way of like cutting straight to the thing. Like, there's no bullshit. Yeah. He just cut straight to it.
Yeah.
And Zach had that. There wasn't fluff. There was a story. There was something that had to be told. And it came natural to him.
Yes.
So,
Zach always had a story. I just want to let you know I just released the spider outside. That's why I'm making such a ruckus.
No, well, that's fantastic. Yeah. I'm glad you released it. My wife would have wanted to burn the house down while I'm trying to release it outside. That's just how this works. I get it. Yeah. She saw a spider in her car once and never found it again. I'm really surprised she still has that car. That's just the way this is.
Lord, save those poor folks on the road with her when there's a spider in the car.
Right? My wife doesn't have many fears, but spiders are definitely one of them. So, so you're with Zach. You're learning all the songwriting. You're learning this process. You're writing songs for Young Valley. You guys are touring like crazy at one point. Y'all were on the road all the time. Built a pretty good following. I mean, I can remember hearing Young Valley on the radio in Mississippi a couple of times. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, this is pretty wild. So then you guys eventually split. Young Valley's y'all aren't doing anything anymore, right?
Right.
See, I don't know that story yet. I don't know. Is it just a hiatus, or y'all, both all were like, all right, that was fun. Now we're going to go do these other things.
Man, it is much easier for me to talk about this today.
Oh, that's good.
Than it was, as it was all, when it was fresh. But the way I think that I could feel a tension, and it was like, as much as we were trying to go on, I could feel that everybody was just kind of like starting to pull in their own way, and that was especially true of me. And what I don't like about that was that I had a hard time coming to terms with the fact that I knew that it just wasn't for me anymore. That I really wanted to do my life sort of on my own timeline. I really needed that. I really needed that for my own discovery. And so, I pulled away and I went internal, and it was something that I didn't really know exactly how to say, but you know what I mean? When it's a band relationship, and it's tough. When you realize that you don't feel like you fit in it anymore. And like, I love it. I recall the times like when it was the five of us, and this includes Kel Kellum and Ethan Frink, who were living in Oxford. That I would say that was the best lineup. Zach, Dylan, his twin brother, and then Ethan and Kel and myself. When there was a point, man, we would drop into a song and it was just like clockwork. It was just, there were some times where we would just play sets so clean and just call them out, and it just like, it didn't matter. We were able to jump right in. I mean, some really great and wonderful shows. It's just, unfortunately for me, it was personally just like the life stuff. Like I didn't have any room in my life for much of anything else. Relationships really came and go, or they were really passive. And it wasn't until and I would kind of dabble in other musical projects, but but keeping the band going took a lot of time. Like we were mostly self-booked. I did the majority of the booking, and so it was, which is, that's a tough deal.
Yeah, no, that's a tough gig, big time.
Yeah.
There's a reason people pay people just to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and those are the people who work for agencies, and they have some clout, and they have, and they have contacts that they've built up over the years. For me, it was just like, once we get in somewhere and we find a place we like, I'm calling them every time.
As you building your contacts, you were building that list. And
yeah,
that's hard.
Yeah. Dude, yeah. That's tough too. But it was a culmination of things, but it was especially like making my record was, I would say, like the first thing that I really did just for myself in my adult life. I've always been like group oriented, always more of a follower, like a team effort sort of guy. And that was the first time I really did something that was like, this is for you. You're putting the money and time into this for you. And so on the side of releasing the Young Valley self-titled record and touring on that, I would play gigs I would do the 6 to 9 restaurant bar gig with an acoustic guitar and take that money and throw it in a stock drawer. And every time I had, $400 a day at the studio rate at Dialback Sound in Water Valley.
Right.
Where I did the record. Every time I got, $800 in cash, I was like, all right, that's two mixing days at the studio. Let's go back, So it was just, but but in that time, I was also developing my own presence as a person who sat with the guitar and played songs myself, and then eventually would lead a band. And so like I kind of, in making my record, I sort of started climbing towards that, as more of a singer-songwriter. So chasing that, I started to feel a very slow tear, and I pulled back, and I wasn't my best and most honest self, but we're on but since then, I've seen all of them recently. One, Ethan just got married, and I got to see all of them, a couple of weeks ago, and it was so great and so heartwarming, and I'll always, I will remember those times forever.
Yeah. So it's that personal growth, just musically. We're all on this journey, and again, like we were talking about, albums are a snapshot in time. Those albums you did with them, and that time that was a snapshot of your time with them. So as you built, and obviously you picked something up, because your album that you put out, like you said, Dialback Records or Dialback Studio over in Water Valley. That album, I think I read a feature on that, at least a song off that album, an American Songwriter. Congratulations on that coverage. That was really cool to see.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was super pumped. It not that anyone ever needs me to be proud of them, but I'm proud of like the friends that I knew, especially those at Delta State, that are picking up and they're moving on and they're doing these awesome, cool things. I'm really glad to see them persevere. And with Hangin Tough, you've crafted some tunes there that, I mean, I get a lot of vibes from a lot of influences. I'll be honest, a lot of influences that I didn't even know you had. Like, because again, when I was around you the most, and when we were in person, you had not become this person who was the person sitting in front of the stage with the guitar playing the songs that you wrote. That's you, Yeah. And so it's really cool to see some of that start to come out. And it. Fortunately or unfortunately, not everyone's going to get to see the transition like I got to see. Not everybody's going to get to see it. They're going to get to see this really polished, awesome album, Hangin Tough, that you've put together, that you put out in 2019. So that means, I don't know exactly when in 2019. Did you get any time to tour in support of that album?
We'll be right back.
This podcast is supported in part by Stringjoy Strings. I'm a snob, at least that's what people tell me. I'm never okay with good enough, and that's where Stringjoy Strings come in. They're better than good enough. They're the best. Stringjoy are making some of the finest strings available today right up the road from me in Nashville, Tennessee. They offer custom sets, balanced tension, coated strings, the works. If you need it, they can probably make it happen. You should be using Stringjoy Strings, and if you're going to order from them, you really could help this podcast out by clicking the affiliate link down in the description or show notes below. You get amazing strings, I get a little bit of that back to help the show keep going. It's a win-win situation. Get your Stringjoy Strings today.
Yes, I did. I was really lucky. Very fortunate in 2019. So, earlier in 2019, I ran into Justin Peter Kinkelschuster, Pete.
Oh, yeah.
He played in a band called Water Liars, based out of Oxford. And Pete is one of the greatest songwriters that I know, and one of the greatest songwriters that I've heard. He's just got a magic touch with it, and I have the utmost respect for him. He was touring solo and came to Jackson in February or January. And my friend Kel Kellum and my friend Will McCarley, they live in Oxford, they were doing an opening set for him. And then it was just Pete playing and singing by himself. And I got to catch up with him. And he said, "Hey, Kel was telling me about your record. Would you send it over to me? You know, this is 4 months before it ever came out. And I said, yeah. And I sent that record to him, and he was traveling down the road, I think, going to Memphis or something before the night's end. And he got to listen to it on the road, and whenever he got to a stop, he sent me like 10 text messages, and it was just like, fuck, dude, just really buttering me up. Like, I remember looking at my phone, like at my bedside, and just like grinning ear to ear, because like, I think Pete is a masterful songwriter. And so for him to hear my record and just send me like stream of consciousness text messages about how much he loves it. I mean, I was so pleased. And then I think it was in the following days, he was like, hey, I'm putting out this record not long after you put out your record. I'm going to do this East and West Coast tour in support of that. Let's get a couple of our guys together and form like a super band where I play bass for your band and you play bass for my band. And we'll just do 2 acts as 4 to 5 dudes. And I was like, all right, that sounds great. And then within that same time, I had just started playing piano with Jimbo Mathus.
Oh, that's right. I meant to ask you about this.
Yeah, which we'll dig into that, because Jimbo is definitely worth mentioning on a blues podcast.
Yeah, he played heavily in the conversation in my last podcast. We'll talk about that when we get there.
Yeah. So, and when also in that same time, I was kind of under this, this was a little later in the year, but Jimbo gave me this sort of mentorship and was also giving me opportunities to open up our shows solo, the Jimbo Mathus and the Incinerator band. And so I'd get to tour with Jimbo and open up shows with Jimbo. And then I was opening this tour with Pete. And, you know, the only thing that I had really done, Philip, for like my album release was I'd booked like, 9 shows in like Mississippi and Tennessee and Alabama that Dylan Lovett and I did. We did like 6 or 7 of those shows solo, and then I did 3 of them with a full band in Mississippi. And that was all that I had booked for myself. I'd put it out myself. All of the press for it was local. I didn't have, it was really like I had no promotion of it, but I got to tour heavily on it. I mean, from the beginning of September, between touring with Pete and Jimbo, I was gone from the beginning of September to about, to damn near Christmas, with about 2 weeks of home time somewhere scattered.
That's pretty incredible. That's really incredible. For a songwriter's first album, I don't know that you put it out on a label. You just put it out independently, right? Yeah. So just independent label for a new, I use that term in quotation marks a little here, but yeah, that's pretty incredible amount of touring, especially with Jimbo, because last week, it'll be last week when this episode comes out. It was actually yesterday I talked to him, but since I put these things out weekly, I interviewed and talked to Eric Deaton, who I'm sure you know Eric, played with Jimbo for years, played bass for Jimbo. And of course I ran into Jimbo. I've gotten to play with Jimbo, never toured with him, just sat in on some stuff before, years and years and years ago, back at Ground Zero when I was working there. And Jimbo is this creative musical tour de force hurricane thing that just, we were talking about that a little bit, that he changes musical styles like most people change clothes. He there's a creativity in him that just has to get out. And so that was really cool. When I didn't even realize it until I read it, that you'd been on the road, you were playing with Jimbo. So you're playing piano with Jimbo.
Yeah.
So that's pretty interesting, because that's another one. I don't think of Spencer Thomas, the piano player. So it's like that's such a fascinating different direction.
Yeah, well, I didn't think of Spencer Thomas, the piano player, when Jimbo asked me to do it. So originally, when he wanted, he wanted me to come play and sing background vocals, I thought that I was playing drums and singing background vocals. I was like, well, I'll tour with Jimbo.
Yeah.
So he started giving some dates, and it was about a month before that, like, Bronson was like, no. Bronson, too, who's an engineer at Dialback. Bronson was also playing electric guitar with Jimbo. He's like, no, man, you're playing keys. And the only reason, like, Jimbo didn't want a keys player. He didn't want the guy who was going to go to all of his tricks.
Yeah.
And really, like a real solo kind of keys player. He really just wanted somebody to play chords, little lead parts, and sing background vocals. We sang a lot of background vocals in Jimbo's band on that tour.
Yeah, I remember those sounds around that tour. He got really into harmonies there for a while.
Yeah. Oh man, and it was so fun. I am so thankful. Like, if Jimbo and I never share a stage again, which I would be pissed if that were true, but if we didn't, that's another part of my life that I would remember forever. Getting in this dirty old faded maroon Dodge Ram that we lovingly coined the murder van.
Awesome.
Getting in with Jimbo Mathus and just touring with him. I was talking with my friend Will McCarley last night, who worked for Fat Possum in Oxford. Yeah. And we just rapped about Jimbo for an hour. And I'll repeat to you some of the things that I was telling Will. A couple of things that I noticed about Jimbo was, like, one, all day in the van, he'd be wearing these, Chuck Taylors that he got from Walgreens, like cargo shorts and tank top, and he'd be playing backgammon on his phone and listen to just a podcast that, we recommend podcasts back and forth. And he would just listen to one. He'd be like, oh yeah, man, I listen to like every episode. He'd just sit there and he would just listen to his podcast, play his backgammon, and be really quiet for a lot of the day. And then, we'd load in the stuff, and then he would disappear in the van for a while, and he'd come out, and he'd have his boots on that say Jimbo on them. He'd have his jeans, his belt with his buckle, his vest,
and he became Jimbo.
Skirt, his cowboy hat, and he emerged, and it was like, that's some Clark Kent Superman shit right there, like, and I just was like, oh, that's it. Of course. Like, you have to be that presence when you walk in the room.
Yeah.
And then when you're on the stage, you're already ready to command it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I saw a little bit of that. I saw a lot of it when I was working at Ground Zero, but I had to learn a little bit of it, fronting bands and being in bands, and it was like it's things. I jokingly say that this is the thing that you always have to explain to anyone dating or going to marry a musician, that the person they are on stage is not who they are, and you need to just ignore them at that point, because they're going to be the performer, and you can't hold them accountable for what happens on stage.
Yeah.
Because that's a different world. They've got to be this. And you got to transform. If that's not your personality, you've got to make it become your personality.
Yeah.
Or if it is your personality, you've got to amplify it. It's got to be more.
Yes. Yes. I think it's amplified.
Yeah. You got to take it, turn it up and be more of that thing. Almost, I don't want to say caricature. I'm not telling people to like be false, but it's like you've got to be more in the same way that we turn our amps up. You've got to turn that personality or that thing about you up.
Mm-hmm.
And Jimbo is a king of it.
Yeah.
He is a king of it.
He said you got to be the biggest monkey in the room.
That's Jimbo. Man, I love it. I absolutely love it. So gonna come back to your record a little bit. So you put this out in 2019. You've had a little bit of success because I could talk about Jimbo all day, and I'm gonna.
Oh, I know.
I'm gonna try like hell. I'm gonna try like hell to get Jimbo on this podcast. It'll be a 2-hour episode, man. It really will. I gotta wait till we can be in person though. Sit around and drink whiskey with Jimbo and record it. That's gonna be the day. I'm gonna figure out how to make that happen. But because I haven't talked to Jimbo in years at this point, and so I didn't get a chance to talk about this with Eric, but like Jimbo is how I met Elvis Costello, right? Like that's who Jimbo is. Jimbo ran a recording studio in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and Elvis Costello one day decided to come down and record. So he was in town in Clarksdale, Mississippi. And it's like, I say met him, it wasn't like a, hey, Mr. Costello, how are you doing? Or anybody saying, hey, Elvis, this is Philip. No, it was me just standing, on the street talking to them and being like, holy shit, don't act like an idiot. Just trying to keep my shit together. So you've had this album. You've moved to Athens, Georgia at this point. I know you're teaching music. Working, waiting for the world to open back up to musicians, basically. You new record in the works. You had some time to sit down and start this process again. Is it a painstaking process for you, that writing process?
No, it's not. It's not painstaking. Some days I do force it. Some days I do force my hand a little bit just to practice the crafting, like just the crafting of the song, like using different chords. Sometimes I just write dead end ideas. Like I know it's a dead end, but let me just fool with it. Because you can take that line, that good line, or that good turnaround, or that good chord progression, and you can slap it onto something good when the right thing comes. So, but I'm certain that you experienced a very similar thing. I was a bit on a roll creatively. Flashback to almost a year ago, maybe February 2020. And I have these notebooks that I tend to write in, usually every day or every other day. Where I write lyrics or just words and maybe just sort of stream of consciousness. And I would do that, and I'd sit down with a guitar, and some days I'd have a song in 30 minutes. And something that I really loved, or something that was going to be really good to work on. Yeah, and it just got to a point where pandemic hit. All of my dates were wiped clean. I had a handful of dates, solo and with Jimbo and some things before I moved. And and so I tried to push towards creativity, and at some point it just stopped.
Yeah, it pushes back.
At some point Well, I had to get past the mental gaps here because now that I've created, because like on all of this touring that I was doing, nonstop moving, I had developed the persona of the songwriter and the touring musician. That was the identity that I had given to myself. And so when I was totally robbed of that identity by the pandemic, I had to go, wait, who is Spencer?
Yeah, that makes sense. Who am I when I don't have this?
Right, exactly. So I had, I was reading a lot. I was going to therapy. I was, just trying to exercise myself to exhaustion. So I, so I wouldn't think too much. And I just in the middle of that, I started kind of opening up more to the piano. I really started attaching more to the piano, and I started writing more ballad-like tunes. One of the things that really greatly affected me in around March, I read Nothing's Bad Luck, which is a biography of Warren Zevon, and
okay.
I went through his discography, and I was like, oh my God, like I really clicked with this. And, you know, it's like the same way that I attached to Bruce Springsteen for a long time and pulled from his music, you know, because we just try to copy our idols until we find ourselves.
Yep.
And so I really gravitated towards Warren Zevon. I really loved his ballads. I loved the way that he could just flip on a dime from like a heartbreaking piano ballad to a in-your-face rocker. Everything was so simple but so smart, and I just clung to it. And so much of that has gone into my writing in the past year. So a lot of piano. I've written more story-like songs that maybe have pieces of me in them or pieces of somebody I know, but I created a story out of a couple of personality traits and put it totally outside of myself. And I'm really proud of it. I really like it. To me, it feels a little more highbrow, but I still feel like it has the same accessibility.
Okay.
You know, I would say that some of my best songs are not going to be songs that are popular to people, you know?
I feel that. Believe me, I feel that. Not only just like the songs I write, I know will never be popular, but like my favorite artists tend to be those that I'm the only one telling everyone about this, you know, for 100 miles. Nobody else is talking about this artist, and they should be.
Yeah.
I have amazing taste in music. I don't know what anybody else is saying. They should be listening to these artists, but I know that they're never going to be on the radio or everybody's, you know, their workout playlist or whatever. This isn't going to be the song you're brushing your teeth to in the morning kind of jam. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel that. So, and yeah, the creative thing is so hard and it can be fleeting. I know that songwriting, just as it was for me in college, it's still the most painstaking thing I do. I have hundreds at this point. Okay, no, I shouldn't say hundreds. I have over 100 little like 1-minute video clips of partial songs that I've written and just stockpiled in a folder that are just full of, you know, because that's the way I remember it, is that I need to remember what chords I played on this song, and I don't need to spend 10 minutes picking out what chord progression I made. I need to be able to see what I played and then also hear what I was thinking at the time. And then, of course, I don't go back to them. And that's the thing. Yeah. It's like you never turn around and go, okay, what was that really good idea I had last week? And that's where my problem is. And so that's why I'm always interested in everyone's songwriting, like their regimen or their workflow for songwriting.
Mm-hmm.
It can be very rewarding, but it can also be infuriating. I know that it's infuriating for me when I try to write, and 2020 was a rough year on creativity for a lot of people. I know a lot of people got into finally recording themselves in 2020. Have you done any of yourself? You thought about self-recording any? You still prefer to go studio, or because obviously I know from our time at Delta State, we were both pretty heavily involved in the recording program that was there. So we had the foundations there.
Yeah. So are you asking like if I've been...
Yeah, you've been like recording these things. You've been thinking about maybe putting out an album recorded yourself. Or are you still planning and waiting and get all these songs into a studio and lay them down that way?
I would like to go into a studio. And in fact, I've run into a bit of luck with that and some relationships that I've established out here in Athens. To answer your question, I have been working on getting better demos at home. I have a couple of microphones that I play with. I just got an RE20 recently that I really love, and I also plan on using it for maybe some podcasting myself. But I've also captured some really nice vocal takes and demos with the RE20. So I've been working on that really just for myself. Just I was like, okay, I have these as voice memos. I have them written on paper. I'm like, let me just make my work just getting these songs that I have written and just putting demos in the can and just going just one after the other and just see how the collection grows over the course of the year. But I really am thinking I want to go to a recording studio, and in fact, I recorded one song that I intend to be on this record that is probably the most rock and roll song that I've written as of recently, and I recorded it at this old church outside of Athens called Portico.
Oh, cool!
And Portico, yeah. So Portico is where my friends in a band called Future Birds recorded. They tracked a lot of their past 2 or 3 records there. And, they were like, we come out here, it's just enough outside of town where we're just out in the sticks. You don't get any service. There's a river, so you can go get on the water. You can go swim in the river. You can come back. There's a full kitchen. There are beds. There's a library full of old books, theology and psychology. It's it's this wild place, but also they got some great sounds out of it. So I went there with Thomas Johnson, who plays guitar in Future Birds, and we set up his recording gear, and we recorded one of my songs there, and that's where I have been heavily considering recording the rest of the record.
Oh, that's super cool. Sounds like an awesome space. Sounds like the kind of space I'd want to put together. Like if I weren't just trying to build I'm working on planning out a studio in my backyard. I'm lucky enough to have a pretty big space with a really big backyard. So, but that's the kind of space I ultimately would like to have. Something with some character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not clinical.
Something about old bones.
Man, isn't it? That's why I think the best venues are in 100-year-old theaters. But that's just me. Yeah. That's just me. So
it's just like the warmth of the wood,
Yeah, exactly. It's soaked up something over the years. You know what I mean? It held on to some of the things that have happened there. It's like I know that New Orleans is totally touristy, but it's like you go to Preservation Hall, and if you can go when there's not even music. Seriously. Go to Preservation Hall and go when there's no music, and that place just has an energy because of how much has happened there.
Gives you a warm hug.
Yeah, doesn't it? Or a stern warning. One way or the other, depending on where you go. But but there's something about those old spaces that have seen and heard things, and how it's still echoing in the wood there somewhere. So that's the kind of space I'd love to have. I keep threatening to open a venue at some point in my life, and the thing that keeps me from doing it, well, one is it's expensive, especially right now. It's a, they talk about some of the highest risk financial ventures in the world are usually restaurants. Well, music venues are right up there. So it's a hard thing to do. But also there's I have to have the right space. I'm not opening up a music venue in a strip mall. You know what I mean?
Oh God, no.
Yeah, it's got to be the right space. It's got to be the right space.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
Because the majority, or a lot of people that listen to this podcast, tend to be gearheads, and we talked about this jokingly earlier, You are notoriously not. Like, gear is not your thing. And I loved this. And so I told you that, if you want to talk about gear, feel free. And your response was?
Well, the response was, yeah, I mean, I can tell you that I have a Nord Electra. What number is it? A Nord Electra. See, I have to see what number it is. It's a Nord Electra 5. It's a HP. I forgot, hammer play. I don't know.
Yeah.
It just they feel like regular keys, So it feels real good on your fingers. Great piano sound.
I love those keyboards, and I literally have zero idea what the difference between any of those models are. Like, they make like 6 different lines, and I'm like, they're all red. Could you make them another color so I can differentiate?
Yeah.
Tell me what they do.
So I almost made the mistake because I found 2 different models online used, Guitar Center online. I mean, and this one was for half the price of what it usually was. I think, I don't know, people were living somewhere expensive and just trying to pay rent, so they had to sell their expensive gear. I don't know really what happened, but I was between these 2 and I didn't realize what I actually got. But I'm actually really glad that I got this one because it has the fully weighted keys. I mean, it's an amazing keyboard. It's an amazing piece of gear. And then I have, but my response to you earlier was I have a Takamine acoustic electric guitar. That's really all I have to say about it. I don't know what model it is. You can plug it in, and it has a tuner on it.
Is this the same one you had at Delta State?
Yeah.
So
same one.
Yeah, it's the same guitar you've had for however many years, at least 10, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one day I'd like to get an old guitar that I could throw a pickup in. Like one day I would like to find like a harmony or something, something like that would, old bones.
Yes. Eric and I, Deaton and I were talking about his guitar. He plays an old Teisco, and there's just something about those old guitars, especially when you find one that's like one of the good ones. Like the Teisco he's got was one of their upper line, so it was a good one even back then, right? Mm-hmm. But then on top of that, it's lasted this long. Not all of those older, especially those import guitars, those Harmonies, those Ks, those Sears brand guitars, and not all of them hold up very well. So when you find a good one, latch on, because nothing sounds like they do.
Yeah, I know. And then, of course, for the people who know what guitars like that are worth, they're definitely slapping a $1,200 ticket on it or however much.
That's exactly right.
At least.
They are. The prices on them are going up. There's not as many to be found for amazing deals or, garage sales or anything like that. People are starting to realize, especially in this heavily online, reverb.com gear market.
Oh, man. Yeah. All that stuff gets swiped up too, and now everybody knows what something is worth.
Yep, I tell people all the time, even as far back as like 2009, 2010. When I was in my last year at Delta State, I paid for most of my rent and my grocery money and my alcohol money. I made that money by flipping gear. I'd find it in pawn shops. I'd find it, from Tradewinds magazine or Craigslist, and I would turn around and put it in the right places where people who knew what it was worth would buy what it was really worth. And I was flipping gear and making money. And not like massive amounts of money, but that's how I made a living. That's also how I had the gear I had, But that's so much harder now. That doesn't exist. That almost doesn't exist now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Living in the age of inflated prices now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, you go, I don't know, to some Delta town and some guy's like, yeah, this is my uncle's. I don't know anything about it or how much it's worth, but I'll give it to you for $50,
Yeah.
Like, that guy can go look online.
Exactly.
and so like you can't take like, it's, one man's trash and make it another man's treasure. And that's exactly how you were making your cash.
That's exactly it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so much harder to do now, but it is what it is. And but
go ahead.
It's another thing though. We are very luckily, we're at a point now where music gear, even the cheap stuff, is really, really, really good. When I started playing guitar, for example, a Squier guitar was trash. You could not play it. The neck would bend like a rubber band if you put even the slightest bit of pressure on it. The fret ends would slice your hands. Now they're putting these things out that are just, they're perfect for $300, $400. And I'm like, that's new prices, right? It's crazy stuff. But yeah, I appreciate as someone who is I don't even want to use the term recovering gearaholic. I just embraced it. I really appreciate people who just sit back. They're like, it's not about the gear. They focus on the music. They focus on the song. And that's an approach I'm trying to push myself towards, is that, all right, I have more gear than most people will ever need. Most people. Time to make some music with it. Time to do something. Especially since I don't get to gig as much as I used to.
Yeah. Well, I'm always happy to extend the knowledge that I've gathered and offer a critical ear when it comes to songwriting. So if you ever just want a second opinion on something that you're writing up, feel free to send it over in an email.
Yeah, we may have to talk about that, because I've been talking about with some other songwriting friends of mine who, they're on their island too, and I've been talking about trying to find a way to create some kind of virtual songwriters circle community, where we can. I don't want to open up to like some crazy, just anybody can join, but I don't want to be too selective. I want to make sure that like the right people with the right ear and the right compassionately critical mentality. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. Because with songwriters, you got to be equal part compassionate and critical. Because there's a way to critique a person's song that helps them and doesn't destroy them.
Passionately critical. I love that. That's beyond constructive criticism. That's compassionate criticism. I love that.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna keep that.
Do it. Just came up with it on the spot. Okay, I can't copyright it, so. But yeah, you got to be compassionately critical, and so maybe we'll talk real soon about see what we can do online. Get a few of our other songwriting friends together and say, hey, let's all sort of work together and maybe. Share some songs and share some critiques and share some ideas. Maybe we'll see something cool come out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, dude,
I think you're onto it.
I think so. I think it'd be helpful if nothing else, especially since there are no songwriter nights happening now. So we may as well do something. Well, I'm not going to keep you too long because I know, it's getting late on a Friday night. I'm sure there are better things that you'd like to be doing than hanging out and talking to an old college buddy. But, of course, it'll be Tuesday when other people are listening to this. It's Friday for us now. But I'm going to wrap it up here. I really appreciate Spencer. Appreciate you coming talking to us. I appreciate you sharing really candidly your stories of your struggles and your songwriting. And I really do wish absolute best for you. I think you're really onto something with your sound. I really love it. And I'm going to be sharing it like crazy. Tell the listeners where they can find you on social media. Where can they buy your record? Don't just tell us where they can stream it, because we know streaming doesn't pay shit. So,
yeah, okay. So you can follow me on all the socials. Well, I only have a couple of socials. Instagram, Spencer Thomas Songs. Facebook, Spencer Thomas Songs. My website is spencerthomassongs.com. It functions enough for you to go to the merch store and select a record or a CD You can also get handwritten lyrics. So I like to do stuff like that as well. I'll always send you a thank you letter because, I don't know, it's just the old school thing I like to do. Yeah, I got some cool releases coming up here in the next couple of months. And so you can follow all those pages and you will be in the know.
Super cool. And of course, he is available on Spotify for those of you. You know, he's not going to turn down that support either, I'm sure. But I highly recommend buying the album. I need to order a vinyl myself. I've gotten to a point now where I don't buy CDs anymore. If I'm going to buy physical music, I'm buying a record.
Yeah.
It's just the way I am. It's the way I prefer to do it. Streaming has completely taken over. It doesn't pay for shit, and we're working on that. I know there's a lot of high-profile people really working on that, but for me, vinyl's where it's at. So you other musicians, if you are not getting your music mixed and mastered for vinyl and put on vinyl, I know it's an expense up front, but I highly recommend it. As for me, I'm Philip. This is 40 Watt Podcast. Remember that you can email the podcast any questions you might have, or if you're interested in coming on the show, 40wattpodcast@gmail.com. That is 40wattpodcast@gmail.com. You can actually call me and leave a voicemail if you have any questions. Maybe I'll answer them on the podcast. Maybe I'll have my guest answer them. Who knows? But you can call at 662-546-0615. You can find us on social media, 40 Watt Podcast. Tell your friends about us. Tell your mom about us. She'll love us. Rate and review us on iTunes. It's not even iTunes anymore. Apple Podcasts, Google, wherever you're listening to us. Leave us a review. Lastly, I've caved to a little bit of pressure. I've started a Patreon. Nobody supports it right now, and that's totally okay. And if it stays that way, that's totally okay. I don't do this for a living. It's not my full-time job. But if you like the podcast and you want to support what we're doing, money into the Patreon directly affects the getting this done. Travel expenses when I can actually start interviewing people in person. It covers gear. It covers hosting fees. It covers all that kind of things, all those kinds of things. And 25% of everything I take in on Patreon is going to be given back to charity every month. Charities like the Delta Blues Museum that has an arts and education program. Charities like St. Jude, which I'm a huge supporter of. I raise money for St. Jude every year. So I want to be able to not only keep this going, but I also want to be able to give back, and that's your way to help me do that. There'll be some perks. There'll be some little things for it. You can see them on our Patreon page, patreon.com/40wattpodcast. Hope you support us. If you don't, that's awesome. I understand money's tight. But until then, thank you, Spencer, for coming on. Thank everybody for listening. I know it's been a little bit of a long one. I've had a great time. Hopefully, we'll be talking again in a little while soon about your new record. So hopefully we'll get you on when you get that knocked out. But until then, I'm Philip. That's Spencer. Y'all take it easy. Be good to each other and make some noise. This episode is brought to you by the supporters of 40 Watt Podcast over on Patreon. Go over to patreon.com/40wattpodcast, where for as little as $3 per month, you can help support the podcast and get every episode ad-free. For $5 a month, you'll get every episode ad-free, as well as a bonus episode every week. I can't overstate how thankful I am for the support of my patrons, and hope you'll consider joining the team and helping keep this show on the road.